colourful contest in the general election is taking place in the London constituency of Kensington and Chelsea. There, the flamboyant former Defence Minister Allan is bidding to return to Parliament. But as Oliver King reports, first he has to face no fewer than 8 opponents, including a teddy bear.
Now I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. I want to be a man.
Beautiful walk. Fantastic. I'm going to vote for Mr. Clark. I'm voting for you, all right?
Fine.
With his wife and minders carefully watching him, Allan takes a saunter round Chelsea. Famously outspoken, he's doing his best to canvass cautiously. He now only whispers those caustic remarks about Labour voters and cleverly avoids this man's urges to say something about foreign benefit scroungers.
Oh, well, the camera's rolling, I know. Yeah. But, yeah, the whole benefit system does need a heavy overhaul.
Allan described his old seat in Plymouth as petty, dull and parochial. But this is Chelsea, and here he's got a notional majority of over 20,000. On the King's Road, most ladies welcomed their celebrity candidate. Have you decided how to vote next week?
Yes. Allan Clark is the greatest fun. You know, if we're going to have a card standing for us, I'd vote for him, yes, like a shot. Oh, yes, he's a good egg. Yes.
I would just prefer somebody with higher moral standards.
I think he'd suit Chelsea very well, actually.
Will you be voting on the 1st of May?
Yes.
Labour's Robert Atkinson knows he has a mountain to climb despite an endorsement from Judge Harkis, whose wife and daughters Allan was notoriously close to. But now he's stressing the Blair factor.
If he does for the country what he's done for the Labour Party, we're in for a very good 10 years.
Scrapping with Labour for second place, Liberal Democrat Robert Woodthorpe-Brown is telling wavering Tories he's the serious candidate.
If you don't want Allan as your MP, then to get rid of him, it really has to be Liberal Democrat.
With a famous wit as main contender, a furry joker has joined the race.
There'll be no waiting for buses under a teddy bear government.
With the slogan, "There are no fleas on us," Edward Teddy Bear is hoping to at least embarrass Allan
We come from the woods and we're going to Westminster. Vote Teddy Bear. You know it makes sense.
Financed by a cable television channel, the Bear's modern media campaign kicks off on Monday with a picnic in Westminster.
And here is the full list of candidates standing in the Kensington and Chelsea constituency. And that's the news. Now back to A Week in Politics.
Good evening to A Week in Politics, in which the battle turned really nasty. Who will win on May the 1st? Gallop, ICM or Maury? Or will they all lose? Again.
Politicians are a pain in the backside and party propaganda is rubbish. Which of the party leaders described his own trade like that, and why? Find out in our guide to the party election broadcasts.
Well, as you saw on the news, the last weekend of the campaign has seen no pause in the leaders' frenetic activity, nor any let-up in the opinion polls' frenetic inactivity. Labour stubbornly hangs on to a huge lead, despite the predictions of some that there would be a dramatic narrowing of the gap in the last week. Perhaps Labour has managed to avoid any movement by scare stories about pensions in the last few days, prompting John Major to accuse them of scurrilous, unscrupulous campaigning. With me are 3 senior politicians, Jack Straw, William Hague and Ming Campbell. Now, Jack Straw, when Peter Lilly announced his new pension proposals, the one that you're busy rubbishing at the moment, Tony Blair said that the plans were a bold contribution that would, by opening up the debate, give whoever forms the next government the chance to conduct the debate more sensibly. His words. Well, you've changed your tune yet again for electoral purposes. Now you're indulging in cynical scaremongering. Why didn't you just stick to what Tony Blair said at the time?
We're not indulging in cynical scaremongering at all. The simple truth is that as these proposals have been examined in detail, it's become, particularly the technical note, which was not the subject of huge scrutiny at the beginning, it's become very clear that the Conservatives are indeed, and they're on the record, intending to abolish the state pension. And what is interesting is that there's been this huge panic in the Conservative Party. All their accusations about lies yesterday, which we hear before each election, but we know that these accusations of lies turn out to be the truth after the election. But today, as the dust has settled, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has said that the proposals are effectively to privatise the state basic pension. Then we, and yes, just make this point, I watched CFAX last night, as I sometimes do, and to begin with, there was Mr. Lilly saying, well, this would affect 23, 24, 25-year-olds. Later on, it was 30-year-olds.
Well,
there is no doubt at all
getting away
about
from
the
what the
Conservatives'
Conservatives
intention.
are doing, just stay with Labour for the moment. Speak for Labour, whatever your nighttime habits are with the television. According to Frank Field, Labour should move decisively to claim Peter Lilly's inheritance. So he was talking off the top of his head without any research. He didn't know what he was talking about. Why don't you just admit that you're going to have to do something of the same? Because Frank Field says you are. Well, and you place a lot of store by what Frank Field says.
Frank has interesting ideas, but Frank is sui generis, as we lawyers say in the trade. He's one on himself. He doesn't speak for the party. He doesn't claim to. We made it very clear in our proposals that we have no plans whatever to abolish the state pension, as the Conservatives plan to do.
Let's move on to William Hague. Now, you asked for it, didn't you? You were desperate to show that you hadn't run out of ideas. So you threw any ill-formed proposal on the table, hoping that people wouldn't notice.
Well, let's be absolutely clear. We have no plan to abolish
the third time you've been absolutely clear, the both of you.
We are not abolishing the state pension. All we have proposed is a different way of funding the state pension for people who are now very young. And this tactic has been used in the last few days by the Labour Party, which has scared a lot of people. It does scare people, understandably, and it is completely false.
Now, William, your favourite with the bookies to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. This is ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, you wish to withdraw from that point because you regard yourself as far too young and inexperienced, so you won't be throwing your hat or indeed any other
article of clothing. It is absolutely ridiculous. John Major is going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party.
You rule yourself out in the event of the unthinkable.
John Major is going to be the leader of the Conservative Party.
So you definitely wouldn't stand then?
Don't count John Major out as the next leader of the Conservative
I
Party.
just want to get this absolutely clear. In the event of you being...
absolutely clear now. Everybody can go around, different members of the Cabinet and say, would you stand,
This is the kind of endorsement Michael Foot got before
in 1983. And then once somebody says they would stand, you go around, all the others said, well, would you stand? And we're not getting into that because we're going to win the election and John Major is going to be Prime Minister and leader of the
word is yes. You could end the debate now. I rule myself out. Yes?
John Major is the leader of the Conservative Party and he's going to stay there.
Ming, word is that Tony Blair might offer you a seat in the Cabinet. Would your party allow you to take it?
Well, I'd rather like to win the lottery, and I think the chances are just about the same.
Really?
It's pretty...
About 15 million to 1?
About 15 million to 1.
Really?
I think that's a pretty reasonable estimate of what the prospects are.
There's gossip, too, that if Paddy does badly, the Lib Dems do badly, that there would be a contest for leadership. Would you regard yourself as too old for that?
Well, I'd like to adopt what William Hague said so effectively just a moment or two ago on this topic. Paddy Ashdown will be the leader of the Liberal Democrats as long as he wants to. And indeed, since he's covering about twice the mileage of the other leaders put together, then it looks as if he's pretty fit to do the job for some considerable time to come.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for those very full and frank answers, if I may say. So please stay here when the people of the rest of Britain who have travelled a long way will be having at you.
The opinion polls say Paddy Ashdown hasn't a hope of making it to Downing Street. They're wrong, he already has. Only this morning, the Liberal Democrat leader parachuted into Downing Street, Chippenham, home of our election soap opera. He hoped to snaffle up some floating or tactical voters in a seat where his party is the main challenger to the Tories. Did Paddy persuade Downing Street to go yellow? Find out in this week's episode.
Hiya, Brenda.
Hi, Karen, fine, you? Have you made your mind up?
I might vote Labour this year. I might, but...
Well, I want to vote Labour, but I think locally it's going to have to be Liberal Democrat because that's the only way we can get the Tories out of North Wales. What do you think about Paddy?
I really like him, Miss Lash.
Yeah?
The other two are like robots. I don't like either one of them. Well, I'd like Paddy to win. I'd like him to sweep the board with all of them. Shake
Can you
them all
really
out.
see it happening then?
Not this year, no. But then if we all think like that and we don't vote for him, then he's never going to get in and he's never going to get a chance.
Hey, Phil.
Hiya, Karen.
All right, yeah, fine. Have you,
what?
Have you read the local paper today to see about Paddy coming?
Paddy, I know, I think he's lush.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Do
you? You don't like him, do you?
No,
you're a Conservative girl.
No, I haven't. Karen,
will.
I haven't decided on that yet because, like I've said all along, Tony Blair is very hot on education. You know, it's really good. His manifesto on education, and John Major, obviously on small businesses.
But then, you know, you want education. What about Paddy? Paddy, he's going to do something for education?
No, he's going to put 5p on a packet of cigarettes. And that's going to lose me business, because when cigarettes go up, people give up, and that loses me business.
So do you think you'll make a point of seeing Paddy on Saturday and asking him anything?
I don't think so. I don't think he can answer any specific questions that would change my mind from voting Labour. I still don't think I'm going to tactically vote.
I'm not really interested in his policies, really, but I'm interested to see how he reacts to the idea of people voting for them tactically, because I might tactically vote.
My name's Kevin Dawson. I voted Conservative in the last election. I won't be voting Conservative this time. I feel as they've gone tired in government, and it's about time we had a change. I haven't yet made up my mind, but it's going to be a choice between Labour and Liberal Democrats.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
Come in.
Thank you very much.
So when Paddy Ashdown comes on Saturday, what questions are you going to ask him?
I basically just want to know whether he will ever think that the Lib Dems will ever get into government. Because the only way they're going to put in any of the policies that they want to put in from their manifesto is if they're going to be part of a government.
The most famous Downing Street in the country. I should knock on the door if I'm canvassing here, shouldn't I?
Basically, I cannot see how the Liberal Democrats can form a proper government. I'm not convinced. Convince me.
If I'd have said to you 5 years ago that this party, only 8 years old for goodness sake, would actually become the second party of government in this country, that we would have pushed the Tories into third position, we'd be managing £15 billion of public funds on your behalf, you'd have said that was nonsense. But that's what we've done.
I do like your policies on the environment. My concern is how would you actually control these smaller cars?
4p on a litre of petrol over the next 5 years. The money that will generate, we will then plough back into reducing vehicle excise duty, which is currently at £145, your licence for your car, down to £10 if you drive a car of 1600 cc's or less.
You put a penny in the pound in extra tax to pay for specifically education. The basic rate then was 24%. It's now 23%. So putting a penny on the pound, what is the basic rate tax going to be?
Adrian, what we said over the last 3 years is this money is so important that if there is no other way to find the money but to put a penny on income tax, we'll do so.
Presuming you're the next Prime Minister, will you revoke things like self-assessment?
What we are going to do is we will assess self-assessment after a year of operation to see what's going to happen. At present, I share your view that it's working out very, very clumsily. So we want to take another look at that.
Left-wing seems to become a dirty word, and yet what you're talking about is traditionally what I thought of as left-wing, which is what I support.
I don't believe the Liberal Democrats are left-wing. I've got to look you straight in the eye and say to you that, because I mean, left-wing is the old way of deciding politics. You're left or right. Now, there are the really big issues in politics, the issues I'm concerned about, the environment, constitutional change, Europe. Are these left or right? No, they're not.
I think the community facilities for most people are quite slim. And as a party, I'd like to know what you feel that you can do.
I think you find Liberal Democrats, I hope it's true locally, you'll also find people who are utterly dedicated to the community and will be putting what resources they have into the community.
How's business?
Not too bad, actually. Quite good. Will Paddy prove irresistible on May the 1st? Find out next week in the final episode of Downing Street. The celebrities of Downing Street and some of the citizens of Constitution Street in Edinburgh will be joining us a little later to grill the politicians. In a moment, elections are contagious. Now the French are having one too. For a view of our battle from across the Channel, join us after this short break.
Imagine unleashing all the capabilities of your organization. Imagine do something that will. Docker's Pants, available in non-iron cotton. Docker's Pants, because America owes you.
welcome back. It's not only here that Europe is a key election issue. Jacques Chirac this week announced an early election for the French Assembly, and the single currency is the main battleground there too. Tory Eurosceptics would have us believe that across the water all is doom and gloom compared to boom time on this sceptred isle. So in the last of our foreign correspondents' views of the election, we've turned to Paris and Le Monde's London correspondent, Patrice de Beer. Here's his photo diary.
To a Frenchman, the British elections are bound to be interesting, at a time where we too are getting ready for an election called suddenly last week. Our election is being held to get a government in position for painful decisions, including over Europe, over the next 2 years. In Britain too, Europe has become an important issue. So I went to see John Redwood, standard bearer of the British crusade against the single currency. But it is a strange crusade, because when I have been out canvassing with other MPs, Europe has not been mentioned on the doorstep. But it has to John Redwood.
I've met in this area quite a few Eurosceptic liberals who I've been asked to say, well, it's a silly thing to be. Are you a liberal or are you a Eurosceptic? Because if you're a Eurosceptic, I'm your man, you know. Yeah.
However, I was impressed by John Redwood and a bit surprised.
I am a good European. No, I'm not advocating our withdrawal from the European community.
While he denies advocating withdrawal, that seems to be the logic of what he means. He never talks of the European Union, but of the community, which ceased to exist years ago. Redwood is trying hard to look like more than a politician, statesman-like. He doesn't want to appear to my French readers like those Tory Europhobes who are barking endlessly at anything that looks foreign. He knows that if he ever achieves his ultimate ambition, he would have to deal with people like Jacques Chirac and Chancellor Kohl. But Redwood's present agenda for Europe is unacceptable to the other 14 Union members. None of these governments could slash their social safety nets in the way Redwood would like. If this is the Europe Britain wants, we are heading for another battle of Waterloo. But in reverse, Britain would have to compromise or leave the Union. No European public could accept the degree of job insecurity there is here. Internationally, Redwood and his friends are missing a point. France's conservative leader, Jacques Chirac, would also prefer a Europe of nations, but when he came to London, he found that to be a Eurosceptic in France is almost to be a Europhile here. I would hate to see Europe having to leave Britain behind. And just let me comfort you, European countries are not doing as badly as Redwood would have you believe. Rather than for us all to have temporary jobs and meager pensions, I can't help feeling that the British people too would prefer to have better social conditions, better food, and of course better football teams.
Rather tactless remark, I thought there. Poor Tory candidate Jerry Hayes has been hospitalised for the second time in the campaign. He was, you may recall, punched in the face by a stranger 2 weeks ago. This time he unwisely pushed his hand through a letterbox and met the family dog. This gives me an excuse to tell my favourite canvassing story. This candidate sees a fierce dog in the front garden and calls to the woman at the upstairs window, "Is your dog friendly, madam?" "Yes, he is," comes the reply. So he opens the gate and is instantly savaged. "Thought you said your dog was friendly." "It's not my dog," she says. Here's Andrew.
What are party propaganda broadcasts for, apart from providing a 5-minute break to take a leak or make a cuppa? They don't accurately tell us what the parties would do with power, but they do provide an inadvertently illuminating insight into how the politicians really regard us, the voters. They think we're superficial and trivial and only judge our politicians by their looks.
I went up to meet him and the car came along and he got out. And to me, that was that same wee boy with the hair, the colour of ripe corn, you know. And he hugged me and I hugged him and we cried, really, you know. It was lovely.
Vote Liberal Democrat because Paddy's got yellow hair.
If you'd said to me at sort of 18, 19, you're going to be a politician, I would have said, I get it. Anything else, anything but being a politician.
Why? On what grounds? Why?
Because I thought politicians were complete pains in the backside.
Vote Labour because Tony thinks as highly of politicians as we do.
That are the risks. Yes, there are very deep risks, and we have to consider those as well.
Vote Conservative before John fades away altogether. What else do the politicians think of the voters? Well, they reckon we need to grow up. The Green Party thinks of us as a bunch of naughty toddlers who won't keep the planet tidy and will only learn from a children's educational video.
The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. If we equate this unimaginable period of time to that of a 46-year-old person, we could say that when life first emerged, the Earth was already 42. Dinosaurs appeared and vanished about a year ago, whilst the first human being arrived in the last 4 hours.
I wonder how old we'll have to be before the Greens get their first MP. Sir James Goldsmith treats us like children too, summoning the nation into his study for a verbal thrashing about losing our sovereignty. I don't know about you, I found it rather scary.
The referendum party seeks no power for itself. We simply want you to be allowed to decide.
Megalomaniac? Moi? The Scottish nationalists believe that their voters all secretly hanker for a part in Braveheart.
From the dawn of humankind, people and nations have fought good against evil, right against wrong. Fear that eats the soul of every human being, no matter where or when. The fear of poverty, the fear of failure, the fear of being left on a scrap heap unloved and unwanted. We can change the world we live in. All it takes is courage.
So the SNP seems to think that all the Scottish people really care about is having a good piss-up and a fight on the way home. The parties think we're innumerate. Even the rather otherworldly Natural Law Party have discovered that you can prove anything with a graph.
In one case, a group of 200 experts in yogic flying in the Merseyside area brought down the crime rate by 60% relative to the other large cities in Britain, as well as improving the quality of life.
Mind you, if yogic flying is that effective, why haven't they risen to power already? Like all politicians, the UK Independence Party has a touching faith in our gullibility or its own powers of persuasion.
Thank you, Dr. Sked. I, for one, was most impressed. No doubt you were as well.
Some of the parties are worried that we don't know who they are. The Liberal Party. Now, which one is that? Is it the one with men wearing glasses and beards?
Yes, that's right. The Liberal Party, not the Liberal Democrats.
As you may know, we had to intervene and censor some of the party election broadcasts. It was widely felt that the material could incite people to stay at home and not vote. But it's nice to see that old traditions are still observed in the election, of which one is the most venerable, is the pursuit by the Liberal Democrats of the tactical voter. That's where you snuggle up to the party in third place in the hope of defeating the common enemy. The snag is that the common enemy is not always the same one. Here's a leaflet from the Lib Dem candidate in Twickenham. It's all hands to the pump to keep out the horrid Tories. The candidate, Vincent Campbell, seems rather chummy with Labour voters, gently warning them that voting for their own party may keep in the Conservatives. But up in Rochdale, it's the dastardly Labour Party, whom candidate Liz Lynn must beat at all costs. Nice Tories are encouraged to back Liz to see off the common enemy. This sort of thing happens all over. Lib Dems have set their priorities. If it happens to be to involve principal support of the party manifesto, that's great. Vote for us. If your priority is to defeat the common enemy, whoever that happens to be, that'll do nicely too. Vote for us again. Well, in a moment, the great constitution debate. Who can you trust with the future of the United Kingdom? That's after this short break.
I was admiring the fingertip controls of my Vectress CD player when... Take me to the old...
Welcome back. Like me or loathe me, says John Major. You see, the Tories are still committed to choice. Mind you, there's a catch. Whatever doubts voters have about giving the Conservatives a fifth term, according to the Prime Minister, they should vote Tory to save the United Kingdom. Well, is he succeeding in chilling the spines of the voters, or are they warming to the opposition party's plans to reform our democracy? Joining us in the studio are some of the residents of Downing Street, Chippenham, along with some guests from Constitution Street in Edinburgh. And to face their questions are William Hague, Ming Campbell, Jack Straw, and the Scottish National Party's Deputy Leader, Allan Macartney. Grant Pagan, I want to come to you first. You have a point to make about the 18 years the Conservatives have been in government.
Yeah, 18 long, distasteful years of Tory rule, Mr Hague, and sleaze has featured prominently. If, unfortunately, the Tories are re-elected, it will give the impression to the whole country that sleaze is okay and give the Tories the permission to do whatever they please.
All right, I want to throw that across to William Hague in a moment, but I want to take an English view before I do that from Derek Shepherd.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr Hague how he can justify another 5 years of Tory government after all the sleaze, corruption, cash for questions and the latest Heseltine issue. It seems to me that New Labour has got a new start.
OK, let me throw that over to William Hague. The feeling there seems to be that 18 years in power has corrupted your party, and any more will corrupt it absolutely. For that reason alone, you should be thrown out of power.
Well, the case for another term of Conservative government is that it's a Conservative government that is bringing more jobs and rising living standards and greater prosperity to this country, and has done dramatically so over the last 18 years. Now, is that invalidated by allegations about sleaze, is the thrust of one of these questions. One of the refreshing things about setting out canvassing in this election a few weeks ago was to find that the voters considered the issues that I've just been talking about. Jobs.
These are voters, they are concerned with it, clearly,
of course they are, but we've talked to two of them so far, is to find that the voters did not regard allegations about a small number of MPs, some of them unproven, as the point on which to judge who should govern the country for the next 5 years.
All right, let's just ask them. He said only 2 voters were concerned with sleaze. Who here is concerned with sleaze?
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, all of you? Yeah. All of them are concerned with sleaze, and the fear is, if you were given power again, never mind how well or not you've done on the economy, many of your colleagues would think they could do anything.
Well, that's clearly not the case. Where any MP has done wrong, the Conservative Party would agree with any other party that they should be dealt with, and they should be dealt with seriously. In fact, we have put in place the means to do that. But people know that what they are voting on this election is the future of their jobs, the future of their living standards, not unproven accusations against a small number of members of Parliament.
Jack Straw, would a Labour government really be any different? Any minister who misled Parliament, would he be sacked under a Labour government?
Yes, if he deliberately misled Parliament, he would be sacked.
But if he accidentally, because...
Well, hang on a second.
Well, you've qualified it already.
No, just a moment. Yeah. I mean, because there's a serious point here. It's always been accepted if ministers make a mistake and they honestly believe they were saying something truthful.
But that's what the Tories say,
No. Let me make this clear. There's a much more serious issue, that if people deliberately mislead Parliament, then of course they should go. And one of the reasons why there is such cynicism about the whole political process is because, in my judgment, the Conservatives, over this 18 years of increasing centralisation, removal of powers from local authorities, they failed to distinguish between the interests of the Conservative Party and the interests of the public. That has become inextricably confused. Right. Now, I have one other point I want to make, which is this. Yes, only a handful of Tory MPs are involved directly in corruption, but the Conservative Party as a whole has corrupted the political process, for example, by replacing elected councillors by quango appointments.
All right. The other reason people are very cynical about politics is because nobody seems to take responsibility anymore. Now, when you're Home Secretary, if there's a mass breakout from a prison, will you take responsibility? Yes. Will you resign?
No, I won't necessarily resign, but I will take responsibility for it.
You say Michael Howard should?
No, as a matter of fact, what I've always said of Michael Howard is not that he should resign.
When the IRA prisoners broke out from Parkhurst, you said he should resign.
No, what I've always said over these things is that he should take responsibility. And one of the reasons, again, why cynicism of politicians, and particularly of ministers, has increased, as I said, by the way, in the Daily Telegraph only 2 days ago, is because they've seen a Secretary of State constantly blaming others, namely prison officers, who cannot speak up for themselves.
I must bring Campbell in now. This cynicism does seem to be widespread. This election doesn't seem to have enthused many of the voters. A lot of the pollsters are saying there'll be a very low turnout. What are you all doing wrong?
Well, I think what we've done is we've allowed the political system to be debased. We had Lord Justice Scott producing a report on the arms to Iraq scandal, in which he held as his central conclusion that Parliament had been systematically misled about government policy and a change in government policy. And yet, no minister resigned, and many of the civil servants involved have actually been promoted. And where William Hague's analysis falls down, it's quite right that there's been an improvement in the economy. The extent of it's a matter of debate among us. But notwithstanding that improvement in the economy, the reputation of politics and the political system has never been lower. And the reason is because people believe that members of Parliament in the past have used their office in order to line their own pockets.
I want to move on to Allan Macartney, because you're also a member of the European Parliament, and you sit there amidst a lot of French and Italian politicians, for example. And do not the Tories have a bit of a point when they say, well, you may think there are corrupt bits of our politics, but they're very clean compared with most of Europe?
Well, that's a pretty poor defence, isn't it, to say that you should see the rest of them? I mean, it strikes me...
It is a defence, though, isn't it?
But a pretty poor one, a pretty poor one. I mean, it strikes me, listening to Jack Straw, that Labour are copying the Tories, that really it's very hard to see the difference. And I think that the problem that we've got is when you have people in power for too long, they get corrupt, they get careless. We've seen it with the Labour Party's domination of Scotland. We see it with the Tories dominating the UK, and that's why there's such a swing away from both of them in Scotland.
OK, one way some people think that the people can be reconnected with their politicians is by changing the voting system. Andrea Wilkinson, you'd like to change the voting system, wouldn't you? Why?
Yes, I would. I'm in favour of proportional representation, as they have in other countries. I'm a Liberal Democrat voter, and that works well in North Wiltshire because we have a high level of Liberal Democrat voters. But if I were living somewhere else, for example, I wouldn't be able to vote with my conscience. I'd have to vote tactically to remove the government in power.
Yeah, William Hague, isn't this a problem? That a lot of electorates left out of this contest because you're not interested in them. You're interested in about 100,000 people in 100 swing seats, and the system's not fair.
The great virtue of our system is that people have a choice between two competing alternative governments. The problem with a proportional system is that the voters are often left out of it altogether. That parties put a coalition government together after an election, which nobody may have voted for.
But isn't the Conservative Party coalition rather an unstable one between the Europhobic Conservative Party and the Europhile Conservative Party? What's the difference?
People can decide whether or not to vote for the Conservative Party. Now,
which Conservative Party?
What happens in many other countries is that people vote. A party which has had the most more votes than any other parties, does not get into the government, which is a ludicrous state of affairs, because other parties cobble together a coalition with a programme which nobody was consulted on in the election.
Jack Straw, you've promised a referendum on electoral reform, but if you win the sort of landslide the opinion polls suggest, it's going to make a lot of Labour MPs saying, we've got this landslide on the present rules. Why risk changing them, aren't they?
No, they won't say that. Let me say I'm in favour of first past the post for the reasons which William Hague has spelt out. But I ensured that the Labour conference in 2 years accepted overwhelmingly the case for a referendum. So, Cathy, if you want to exercise a choice about a future voting system, then support the Labour Party, because we are the only party which is offering that choice in a referendum.
Let me just check how good your promise is to her. This referendum, will it be done in time so we can fight the next election on a new system if people vote for that?
No, I can't guarantee that. And that
Why not?
Why not? Because it's a matter of timing. And we discussed this out very great detail with Liberal colleagues on a joint consultative committee. We looked at it. We're not promising things we can't deliver.
But how could you, I mean, say the people do vote for the change. Yes, okay. How could you then conduct another election on the system they've just rejected? It's impossible, isn't it?
It's not impossible at all.
It would be ludicrous.
It depends entirely on the timing of the referendum. What we're doing is providing an opportunity, not for politicians, but for the British people, for the first time since the issue of PR became an issue 70 years ago, for the British people to make their decision about that. That, in my judgment, is real democracy.
I mean, Campbell, do you really trust them to deliver?
Well, we have an agreement with them. That's an agreement
entered into.
It's an agreement entered into in good faith by us, and we expect people to keep their agreements. But remember, we've got proportional representation in the United Kingdom. We have proportional representation in Northern Ireland for elections to Europe, so that the minority community does not feel excluded. And if we, the Labour Party and ourselves, honour the commitment to create a Scottish Parliament, then that Parliament is to be elected by proportional representation.
We'll come to Scottish Parliaments in a moment, if you want.
As indeed as the Welsh Senate. The fact is, we have commitments, existing commitments to proportional representation, and people are going to learn how to use such a system.
Let me bring in Ian Faulkner, because you're not at all convinced by any of that, are you?
I'm uncomfortable with PR because minority parties get extra power in a hung parliament situation, and in some of the cases worldwide it's extreme parties as well, not only minority parties.
Right, and let me bring Allan Macartney on that, because at least at the moment in Scotland you're a minority party and he thinks you're going to have far too much power under a PR system.
Well, I think the answer is that proportional representation means you get a fair result. I mean, there has not been a majority government in the UK since 1935. It's always been the biggest minority, or in 2 cases, not even the biggest minority. And we believe it's a fundamental question of fairness. Now, if you look at countries, you can look at all kinds of countries. You can look at Finland, which has had PR and a coalition government, very stable for a long time, Germany, and so on.
Italy, Allan?
All right.
50 governments?
Well,
all right.
Italy is now taking the British system.
Let's not go to Italy, because I want to stay with Scotland, because Laura Cregan Allan is not at all convinced about the Labour and Liberal Democrat plans for a Scottish Parliament, and I'd like you to tell Jack Straw, first of all, why not?
Yes, Mr Blair indicated that Westminster could veto any future Scottish Parliament decision, and that completely defeats the purpose of a Scottish Parliament, does it not?
And has it made you switch your vote?
Absolutely.
You've abandoned Labour for what, the SNP?
The SNP.
Well, there's the point, Jack Straw. If the Scots want a proper Parliament, they should vote for independence, not your half-baked Parliament.
Tony did not say there would be a veto on decisions made by the Scottish Parliament or by the Scottish Executive. We are going to set up this Scottish Parliament with the consent of the Scottish people. There will be a referendum for this, and it will only go ahead if the Scottish people vote for it. It is inconceivable that if it is set up by referendum, that it could not be altered without a separate referendum.
Yes, but the point I was trying to make was, could Westminster veto any Scottish Parliament decisions made, such as raising taxes?
No, it couldn't, because that would require...
Well, no, Tony Blair said, I, as an English MP, are sovereign.
No, hang on a second. That was an entirely separate point. That was the point about the fact that, for example, decisions about the subvention from the Westminster Parliament, from the Westminster Exchequer, will be made by all members of Parliament in the Westminster Parliament, including English, Scottish, Welsh, and Ulster and Northern Ireland members. It's a quite separate point. This Scottish Parliament will be set up by legislation, obviously approved by the sovereign Parliament, the Westminster Parliament, because we're not in favour of separatism, we're not in favour of federalism, we're in favour of setting up a Scottish Parliament within the Union of the United Kingdom.
All right, I want to bring in Callan Anderson. Were you convinced by that?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm very scared of the SNP's future plans for an independent Scotland on the whole. I'm Scottish and very proud of it, but I'm more proud to be British and the fact that there's a union there which has supported Scotland and England and Wales and Ireland as well.
And what about the Labour and Liberal Democrat positions? Are they convinced?
Not really, no.
No? No? Campbell, let me put this to you. You're going to be in an odd position as a Scottish MP once you've got a Scottish Parliament. You'll be able to vote, for instance, on the curriculum in English schools, but you won't be able to vote on the curriculum in Scottish schools because that will be dealt with by the Scottish Parliament. Now,
and
that can't be sustained,
and I should be in exactly the same position as the Member of Parliament for West Belfast, because if the proposals for reform in Ireland proceed, there will be an assembly in Ireland dealing with Ireland's domestic affairs. And Ulster MPs will be able to come to Westminster and vote on the English curriculum, as they did throughout the whole course of the time that Stormont was in existence.
All right, now the Conservatives have been telling us that this could be the end of civilisation as we know it. I want to try out our English audience from Downing Street. Who here is absolutely scared stiff by the prospect of giving the Scots a parliament?
I don't think
any of you? Karen Swallow, are you scared?
No, I don't think any of us are.
Why
I don't
not?
see why Scotland shouldn't have a separate parliament. I don't think anybody from where we come from cares, really. It's up to them. I don't think it's going to be a vote winner.
No, William Hague, it's not a vote winner. I mean, you try to scare them. They're absolutely lukewarm about it. I mean, if anything, they say, give the Scots Parliament if they want one. Why not?
Well, I think the problem in England would arise after the establishment of a Scottish Parliament, because the United Kingdom would be fractured. Either the Scottish Parliament would be a parish council, as Tony Blair inadvertently described it, or it would be a powerful Parliament which would have the power to take Scotland on the route to independence. That's why the Scottish National Party are in favour of it.
Right, well, let me bring in Allan Macartney. Do you see the Scottish Parliament, which your party now says it will sit in, as a Trojan horse for independence?
We've always said we will take every opportunity for standing for election to put forward the case for independence in Europe. We believe that's the best way forward. We will take it in the Scottish Parliament if one is set up under Labour. We will take it for the European elections. It's all we contest all elections on that
Would you
platform.
make their Parliament work? I mean, because PR probably won't produce a majority in that Parliament, will you go into coalition with Labour or the Lib Dems or maybe even the Tories so you can govern Scotland?
Well, it would be up to the parties elected at the time.
But what do you think?
Well,
is that unthinkable or is it possible?
Well, I'll tell you what I think is possible from the last opinion poll that we had in the Sunday Times. It showed the SNP would get 38% of the votes, Labour would get 39%. Now, that is a very interesting figure, because that shows that there'll be lots to go for. But the main thing is that Jack Straw says that they would not veto any decisions of the Scottish Parliament. And yet we've been told that if that Parliament dares hold a referendum on independence and devolution, that would be vetoed by London.
Well, we've been told that.
No, we have been told that.
I want to bring in Callan Anderson again, because you had another point about what the Scottish National Party say they'll do with the Queen.
Yes, I mean, so it's very, very vague how the monarchy will act over Scotland, and so far I've heard that the Queen will only be Queen and monarch of the country when she's in the country itself.
As is true in England as well.
Yes, but I mean, she's the Queen of the Commonwealth and Britain at the same time, no matter where she is in the country at the time.
All right, what will she do, Allan Macartney, if, say, you're negotiating for a divorce with England, and her English Prime Minister and her Scottish Prime Minister give her completely conflicting advice? What happens then?
Well, exactly what happens if the advice is being given to the Queen about New Zealand. The New Zealand Prime Minister gives her advice as to what happens in New Zealand. We see that as a perfectly acceptable way of proceeding. If the Queen's in New Zealand, she exercises the powers of the head of state. If she's not, she does not.
All right, now, I want to stay with the hereditary principle because that brings us neatly onto the House of Lords. William Hague, I was flicking through some old conference speeches recently, and there was a young thruster at the Tory conference in 1980. I was fascinated by his speech. He said, "It is hard to defend an assembly where most members sit through privilege of accident of birth. The best approach is to confine the Lords to life peers alone." Who said that?
No,
You did, didn't you?
I wonder who said it, Hanna.
You said it.
I
You
wonder
said
where
it,
you got
didn't
that
you?
from. Of course, if politicians weren't allowed to change their minds, there wouldn't be a programme for the Labour Party at all in this.
Yeah, but what about you?
There wouldn't be a manifesto of the Labour Party at all. I certainly think that if you were starting from scratch, setting up a legislative assembly, you wouldn't include a hereditary element. But I also think it would be a vast waste of time and energy to remove that, just to have a large appointed quango, which is what is now.
Let me bring in
the House
Bruce
of Lords.
Finlay. Who do you think was right? The rather older William Hague here, who now defends the hereditary peerage, or the young thrusting William Hague, who thought it was absurd?
William Hague with some hair in his head. He spoke sense.
So the young Hague spoke sense?
Yes, I think they should get rid of the Lords altogether. I do think they should bring in an upper house of citizens made up of nurses, dockers, and people who have come and done good work during their life for 30, 40 years. They should be elected. It should be a citizens' house, and it shouldn't be made up by lords, even people that write Don't Cry for Me, Argentina.
Or even William Hague, lords who've broken the law. Lord Brockett, when he comes out of prison for insurance fraud, will be able to go and make laws again. How can you defend that? How can Lord Brockett have a seat in Parliament?
There is a problem with saying, let's have an elected upper house. Of course, that's quite logical. Many countries in the world do it. But if you do that, if it's elected at the same time as the House of Commons, you get a rubber stamp for the House of Commons because you get the same party majority. If it's elected at a different time, you get a paralysed constitution because neither house can get its way.
All right, I want to hear from Laura Cregan because she might be closer to your view on that.
With the House of Lords, it's obviously not perfect, but the other choices are worse. You get either the quango or a second elected assembly fighting
and Jack
again.
Straw, we already see that at work, don't we? I mean, all these Labour MPs who've been bumped off just before the election, they're all re-emerging as Lords. It's already becoming a Labour quango, isn't it?
No, it's not. And the simple fact of the matter is that people are appointed to the Lords in their lifetime on their own merits. People can argue about the merits, but they are appointed on those merits. If you're defending the hereditary principle, what you're also defending is the use of all these hereditary peers, the overwhelming majority of which are Conservative, using their power to force the poll tax on Scotland. Never forget, and then on England, never forget, if you think there's an argument in favour of hereditary peers, that it was that undemocratic power of those people, on the whole, rich and very powerful, using that Tory power to foist the poll tax on people. There are many other arguments against hereditary peers, but that is overwhelmingly the argument, and it's a built-in Conservative majority. It's wholly undemocratic.
I must bring in Ming Campbell, because you said you don't want this quango. You said you want a properly elected upper house. So will you vote down, if there's a Labour government, their plan to create what you call a quango?
You're supporting it. No, because what we've done is, in our agreement about constitutional matters, we've agreed to the first step, which is the removal of the hereditary principle.
But they've given you no guarantee there'll be a second step.
And then we said, but we accept their good faith. Then we set forth the process of agreement. I can't resist the observation, though. People are always saying that the House of Lords is full of experts. If Lord Brockett comes back to take his seat, he'll almost certainly be an expert in penal policy.
That's a nice one.
Allan Macartney, I want to give you the last word. Would Scotland keep an upper house composed whatever way?
No, definitely not. No, we think that is very archaic. It's perhaps the clearest example of all of why the UK is seen with a mixture of amusement and derision by the rest of Europe. It seems to be thorough to the Middle Ages. Its voting system is medieval, and the House of Lords, with people sitting in ermine because of their great-great-grandfathers, it just symbolises the archaic nature of the British Constitution.
There, we must close this discussion. I thank you, the politicians, William Hague, Allan Macartney, Ming Campbell and Jack Straw. And thank you most of all to the people from Downing Street and Constitution Street who've questioned the politicians so adeptly. Thank you all. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for this week on This Week in Politics. Next week It'll be all over. We'll be analysing who won and who lost. Now, you might think you know who's going to be Prime Minister.